Today I'll show how to replace this very rusty floor by cutting out all the bad metal, cleaning up what's left, piecing together and welding in new metal, and finally sealing everything up so it doesn't rust again. Welcome back to the 6th Gear Garage. Today I'm going to be installing new floor pans in my rusty 1980 Toyota long bed. I already pulled the seat and vinyl floor cover in a previous video. Now I'm removing anything else that I don't want to be accidentally damaged by any hot sparks, such as the seat belts and this wiring harness. Next, I need to scrape and chisel off all the factory sound deadening from any surface that I'm going to be cutting or welding. Replacing rusty floors is a long process, so I recorded a lot of this in time lapse to keep this video short and still show how much work is involved. This truck is pretty rusty and the floor pans weren't large enough for all the rust I have to cut out. So I'll show how to install replacement floor pans as well as fabricate floor pieces from scrap sheet metal. Okay, I've stripped off most of the sound deadening. I left all this in the middle because I'm cutting all this out anyways, but I kind of want to see the perimeter and see what lines up with my floor pans. And it turns out that these reproduction floor pans aren't that accurate. First of all, this one's a little warped, but you can see there's a raised lip right here, and that's designed to meet up flush with this piece right here where the seat mounts. So I can't exactly push this down right now because this 90-degree edge here actually sits and gets welded against the inside here, and I can't really line that up until the old floor is cut out. But right off the bat, I could tell that it's not quite the same because this is all smooth right here, and there's a small cutout for the bolt hole for the body mount. But if you look at the original floor, you can still see where it's not completely rusted out. There's this gray surface here, and there's a little bit up here left, and then it kind of rolls down, and then the whole floor is a little bit sunken down right here, and that's what bolts the floor to the body mount because the floor is part of the cab. Well, in this, I don't know if they intend this to just sit on top of this. That's not what I'm going to be doing here. I want to actually have this be as close as it was to the way it was from the factory. So I'll have to find a way to make that work. And there's some other inconsistencies as well, like the spacing of these raised areas in the floor. They're not exactly the same, but you know what? It's a lot better than this. So I'm gonna work with what I got, but first step is gonna be cutting out this floor. Now I don't have enough material here to actually go up, so I'm gonna have to fabricate new metal for all this and this right here. And there you can see it's just a little bit short coming across, and of course, I've got this inner panel here, which I'll have to completely fabricate as well. That's not going to be a huge deal because it's not going to be that visible. And they give you a lot of extra material over on this side, which is good because I have a lot of really bad surface rust and pitting over here. It even extends up past this. We'll see how well I can clean that up. If I'll need to cut more out and extend this, I can always do that. And to do the cutting, I have a cutoff wheel. All right, so I have this cut all around the perimeter. I had to use a hammer and chisel to get into the very corners where I couldn't reach with the cutoff tool. But it's getting stuck coming out because it is still somewhat connected here where it goes under this bolt that connects to the body mount. So even though this thing is old and rounded off, I am gonna have to find some sort of socket to hammer on there to try and loosen that. That actually went pretty well. Some gloves on here. Try not to get tetanus. Oh, it's still on. I think what I'm seeing here is that there's another layer under here, probably for additional support since it's near a body mount and the sheet metal for the floor is spot welded to this other piece, which probably connected to the side of the cab here. Let's see if I can chisel out these spot welds. All right, now it should be free. So, where to begin with this mess? Well, first of all, this came out with the floor. It was just easier that way. But you can see there is a separate piece here, and that's for some extra support. And it'll actually show you on the donor truck. Here's a better look at it. Here, the top layer of the floor is rotted away, but that piece is still intact. So I will have to fabricate something up to make up for that. And then here's a piece of aluminum flashing that one of the previous owners installed under the hole. And we saw in the previous video, the license plates and that rubber sticky sheet were over the repair area, and it actually probably kept a lot of water from getting in the cab. But unfortunately, that area is pretty bad. I'm gonna have to fabricate that because this is all rotted. And the rest of this actually sounds really solid. You can see this lip here. That is just from the edge of the sheet metal where the floor pan was spot welded to the inside of this rocker panel. And this black coating, which probably kept the rust from getting a lot worse, is actually a Z-bar coating. I don't know if you guys remember Z-bar from, I think they're around in the 90s, but that's what all these little plugs are all around the cab. Got it going down here, down here, down here. What they do is they drill a hole and they spray this black sort of sticky undercoating on the inside. And you can see it probably does work because I think this would be a lot worse if it didn't have it. Of course, down here on the rocker panel is a bit of a different story, so I'm definitely gonna have a rocker pan replacement video coming up after I get this floor done. So there's how the new floor is gonna kind of sit in there. I just noticed something. Look, this is the inner plastic fender liner, and there's nothing behind it at all. I'm gonna take this out and see exactly what's going on back here. Well, it was just easier to pull the whole front clip off because I'm gonna have to end up taking it off anyways. And turns out this side isn't much better, but let's just focus on the driver's side for now. And it does get uglier behind the fender. Luckily, this is all gonna be hidden, so I can fabricate this using the skills that I have and nobody is gonna see it. I've actually only ever done two floor pan repairs before, one in my 1985 and the other in the 1969 International Harvester Scout, and I don't think either were this bad. So my next step is going to be continuing to clean this up. I'm going to go along this edge here with a wire brush and get off all that loose scaling rust, see how that looks underneath, and remove the rest of this inner floor pan here that's spot welded to the inside of the cab rail here. So drilling out spot welds is not a fun time. You can see there's one every few inches. They kind of blend in. There's one right here. And we got one in this little recessed area right here. A lot of times they're a little bit lower. And there's one there. We got one there. And I just need to drill every one of those out, and then this strip of metal here will come right off. And I should have picked up some spot welding drill bits, but instead I'm going to use this step bit. It should also get the job done. Start by using a punch and put a little divot in the center of each one. Give it a little bit of oil there to help it cut. And this is taking forever. Sometimes you can pop them off before you get all the way through. It's a lot faster than waiting for this thing. I can't say I recommend the Harbor Freight step drill bit. Instead of wasting more time with that step drill bit, I went straight to the chisel on the rest of the spot welds. Then I cleaned off the remaining seam sealer with the wire wheel to get down to the bare metal. So you saw I got the rest of this old piece of floor pan off after I busted all the spot welds off. And I went back again with the wire brush and took off any remaining seam sealer that was below that. So I've got a nice clean surface here, except for all that rust. Now some of this is just surface, yet a little on the heavy side, but I'm going to go through with now a sanding wheel and see if I can grind that smooth. You might remember this from the frame repair video I did on my 1985. It has this attachment, just threads into there, and then that goes on the drill. And that's good for sanding in tight areas. And that wasn't getting into the pits very well. So when I'm using a wire wheel like this, I'm going to be running for a long time. I saved my cordless drill for the small job so I don't burn that up. I've got an old cheap corded drill here, which is great. And also, when you're using the wheel like this, eventually the wires will start to bend in one direction. So after maybe 30 seconds, go ahead and switch it in reverse and go the other direction, and that'll give you more bite. The wire wheel worked a little better in removing rust from the pitted areas. But I still needed something more aggressive to get the metal surface 100% clean of all rust. So you just saw me grind this down with this sanding disc. I tried it with this flap wheel, as well as this wire wheel. And if you look real close, this right here is good metal. See how that's silver? And this down here below it, you can see it has this black finish on it. That is rust. Just because it's not brown or orange anymore, there is still rust on this metal and it's still contaminated. And I cannot weld to this or else my weld will be contaminated and eventually rust. So I need to get something more abrasive to get through this surface right here. And for that, I'm going to use a grinder. The grinder was the way to go. I should have used it to begin with. Not only does it do a great job at removing the pitted rust still left behind by the other methods, it also smoothed down what was left of the spot welds that I broke off with the chisel. All right, so it's getting there. You can see before an example of the black area where there actually was rust on the surface. And as we go down here now, you can see it is very reflective. I do have a spot right here I still need to grind, but aside from these small spots right here, I still need to grind that down some more. It's getting better. Got a big spot right here and right here. Unfortunately, I can't get behind here with the grinder because the body mount on the frame is in the way. What I can do though is try and chisel the rest of this off of here and see, for one, if this is even solid and worth saving, or if I'm gonna have to weld in a whole new piece of metal in here anyways. And I could actually just cut this entire mount off anyways, because I am not gonna use this frame. I'm gonna use the one that's under the other 1980 long bed, but I do wanna have a reference here to line up my new floor. So I'm gonna keep this in place and try and work around it. So it's getting pretty thin back here. There's a hole right here, and this is all looking pretty bad. I'm just gonna see if it's all this thin. All right, so it's not going through. That's a good sign. I guess I'll just try and keep chiseling away at the rest down here and see how much I can clean up. You know, the more I look at this back here, the more I just don't like it. I'm gonna go ahead and cut it all out. I'll do a cut right here, cut across the bottom, and I'll just take this all out here because, as you can see, it's paper thin. And then this whole section here wraps around the outside and rusts through right here. So I'll probably end up cutting this all out as well and just build it all from new. A little more than I bargained for, but you know what? I don't want to have this rust come back. First, I drew a guideline with a Sharpie and then made a vertical cut with the cutoff wheel, being careful to only cut through the top layer of sheet metal. I might as well get the door out of the way. Some of these areas were so rusty that the spot welds broke easily with just a chisel and no drilling. All right, time to bring out the big guns. This will speed things up a little bit. The Sawzall cut through the really rusty thin metal like butter. The blade was also able to reach areas I couldn't access with the cutoff wheel. So I'm cleaning this up down here, and I had originally cut this line right here, up here, and across here, just because this was in my way. And now that I can see, I'm left with a piece of steel right here that's spot welded onto the body, and that piece is actually flush with the rest of this here. So what I want to do is remove the rest of this so that when my new sheet metal is welded in, it can be flush with this and not actually have to go over this. So I'm going to take all the old sheet metal out, and to make this easier this time, I went ahead and ordered some spot weld drill bits off Amazon. I got a 5-pack of these. It was like 20-something bucks. I'll put a link in the description. And you can see these are made for cutting out spot welds. They're flat with a little point in the middle versus the angle of a normal drill bit. So this should go a lot faster now. Once I drilled out the spot welds, the rest of the sheet metal separated easily with a chisel. Okay, I got these two pieces out from down there. Those spot cutting drill bits do work a lot faster. Now you can see I did drill all the way through here, and that's all right because I can use these holes to do plug welds to the back of the new metal that I want to put on this side. I'm going to go ahead and pop these two covers off and see what the inside looks like. I got to pop this one off anyways because the rust is creeping up behind it. So if you look inside these panels, you can see it's all sort of this black sticky coating inside there, and that is the Z-Art coating. And if you go over here and you look at the Oklahoma truck, which was never rust proof because you don't really need to do that sort of thing down there, it's just bare metal inside, and there is surface rust too. So Z-Art probably saved this truck from rusting a lot worse than it has. So let's keep cutting away all this cancer here. I went ahead and removed the ECU, so that's out of the way. And I've got some marks here. I marked every spot weld that I'm gonna have to drill out, as well as a rough guide of where I'm gonna cut and replace metal. So this will be staying up here. This down here is all gonna go. And I marked it from the outside as well, although you can't really see it right there and right there, because it's gonna be a lot easier to cut from the outside than it is to squeeze myself in here and shoot sparks in my face. All right, so here's my final cut line. This is actually good metal behind here. Despite having some surface rust, the Z-Art has kept it from rusting from the backside. So that's on the front only. So I don't need to cut up into this at all. I can leave this here and just go down under here. I will have to fabricate a new little triangle for this corner as well. But first, let me get all the old out so I can figure out all the new I'm gonna have to put back in. I'm using the wire wheel to remove the rubberized undercoating in order to see how far the rust has crept up behind it. So after grinding off all that undercoating, I can see about how far the rust does come up on this side. And being on the outside of the cab, it's actually a little bit worse out there than it is on the inside. So I went ahead and put my lines about where I'm gonna cut to eliminate all of the very bad rusty sections straight across here and around. And I'll get up to right here for now and just worry about getting this part out, and then I'll worry about getting this transmission tunnel cut out here. This is actually pretty bad. I went to drill out the spot weld and the chisel went right through the metal. So I'm thinking all this is gonna have to come out all the way up to probably right here. In addition to cutting this out, there is a vertical spot weld that goes down the side here in the engine bay. And I found the 2 spot welds I'll have to drill out to release this piece of sheet metal from that. And there's the piece I'm talking about right here. Now, rather than sit here with a cutoff wheel for 20 minutes, I'm just gonna get the Sawzall and see if I can blast right through this. I've already went through the engine bay and I removed any sort of cables that were in the way. There was a e-brake cable and there was also the speedometer cable. So those are gone, out of the way. I don't have to worry about cutting through those. Obviously be mindful of what's on the other side of the floor, especially when you have brake lines and fuel lines like you do on this side. So I'll have to be really careful when I'm cutting out this side of the floor to watch out for those things. Well, that didn't go well. This is just so floppy that the vibration of the reciprocating saw is just vibrating this back and forth, and it's actually not actually cutting through it. It's just moving with the blade. So it looks like I have to get a cutoff wheel out anyways. I tossed a bag over the shifter to protect it from any hot flying sparks that could cause pitting. This was the point I realized I should finally buy a welding blanket, since I'll have a lot of welding to do on this project. I ended up getting a reasonably priced one from Amazon that I'll put a link to in the description, along with all of the other tools and supplies I used for this project. Out with the old. And as I'm moving around my floor here, I got over this part and wondered if I really need to cut as high as I had my original line marked here. So I drilled a couple holes here, drilled a hole here, and both of those are very solid thick metal. So I figure I can lower my line a little bit and just do one straight cut across down to this corner. And that's it. All the old rotted rusted metal has been cut out. Now comes for the fun part, figuring out how I'm going to weld all this new metal in. I'm going to do that using some cardboard templates, but first I need to go around every edge, inside and out, and clean off any remaining rust, paint, sound deadening, anything that prevents this from being a clean metal edge, because that's not going to be good to weld to if there's any kind of contaminants on there. And tool of choice for that is the wire wheel mounted on the drill. And the nice thing is you don't actually have to get under the truck to get the back sides, because you can obviously go in this direction to get the front sides, flip the direction to go counterclockwise, and then just put it under the edge and push up, and that'll clean the back side just as well. Rather than making a mess with the wire wheel, I used a hammer and chisel to break off the sound deadening from the edges I needed to clean up, and then followed up with the wire wheel to remove any remaining primer, leaving clean, bare metal. And then repeated the same process on the outside of the cab, removing the Z-bark coating, paint, and primer. So I just got done cleaning up all the perimeter surfaces that I'm going to be welding to. Now I used my wire wheel and just went ahead and brushed around the edge, as you saw. And in some of the tighter, smaller areas, this was too big, so I went back and I found some of these older ones that I'd used, but there's really not much material left on it, but I don't throw them out because they're perfect for tight areas. So I've just set this in place real loosely for a second. As I mentioned before, I am gonna have to modify this floor to work. The fitment down here is not that great, and this should be cut out and recessed right here. But before I even get to that, the first thing I need to do is repair this area over here, because the edge of the floor is actually going to weld to this, so I need to have this done first and then work my way over here. And to do that, the first step is going to be making a template. I've got a piece of cardboard here. I'm just going to set this inside and do a trace. I'll do the outside perimeter first to start with, and then I'll go in here on the inside and figure out where I need to cut here. Now it's time to trace the cardboard template onto my sheet metal. And I've got a scrap here that's just about the right size. This little tiny strip here is going to hang off, but I don't mind just cutting that off and trimming this out and welding it on later. Just so I don't have to use a brand new piece and have all that waste. I grabbed my aviation snips to cut this shape out, since it had some curves to it. They come in sets of 3, and the red ones are for left cuts, the green are for right cuts, and the yellow-handled ones, which I know I have somewhere but haven't lost long enough to warrant buying new ones, they're for straight cuts. If you're cutting anything with a lot of details or curves, I recommend aviation snips over tin snips. I'll put a link to these in the description. Then I stripped any paint or primer from the edge using the worn-down wire wheel. The short wires on the old wheel are more aggressive and strip the surface down to bare metal a lot faster than the longer, more flexible wires on the new wheel. I'm using a bench vise to add bends in the metal to match the shape of the body. And I needed to do a little more trimming to get it to fit better. I'd rather have to remove a little more material later on than cut it too small to begin with and have to start over. For as simple as going from a cardboard template to sheet metal sounds, there really is a lot of fine-tuning to make everything fit perfect like a puzzle, especially on a piece like this with so many edges. So the repair piece is finally trimmed to exact size, and I have it all clamped in here and held in place with all these vice grips. And there's one more thing I have to do. You can see I made a dotted line going across here. There's actually going to be another layer of sheet metal on top of this. So you can see this little ridge here comes out and then stops while I cut that off. So I'm gonna have to continue that out and have it go down to about right here and go down there. And that's gonna make this all flush. And then from there, I'm gonna have another bracket, sort of a support bracket that comes out and goes across here. And I'll show you on the other truck what that's gonna look like. Here, this is what the one from the factory was. Just kind of went out at a 90 and went across, just to give some extra support on the body for all the weight on this body mount. And you can see I've removed paint from all around the perimeter where any welding is going to take place. I don't want that paint to burn and contaminate my weld. But I didn't do it right here yet, so I need to take off some paint right there, and I've already got some paint off the bottom. I don't know exactly where about this will end. I'm thinking right about here is where it ended from the factory, so I'll take some paint off from right there too. Now it's finally time to weld. Here's the welder I'm using. It's just a 120 volt MIG, and I've got some C25 argon gas here. And this is a perfect combination for some sheet metal like I'm going to be welding today. This cabinet here is actually an old server cabinet that I repurposed and built a base and put some casters on, and now it's a perfect welding cabinet. I've only got like 4 outlets out here in the garage, so I moved it over here. Everything is clamped in, ready to go. Some spaces you can see I'm gonna have to massage a little bit once I get some other tack welds started, so I can tap that in with a hammer a little bit to kind of form that to match the curve of the body. And down here where I have my plug welds that I'm gonna do, where I have the vice grips clamped tight, those are flush. You can see these over here, they're not flush. So as I go along, I'm going to move these vice grips closer to my plug welds so they'll be nice and flush. Start there, 16 PSI. I'm starting my first tack welds near the vice grips, where the metal is clamped together tightly. Moving the vice grips as I add more tacks to other areas. Then, once I'm happy with how the two pieces are tacked together, I'm going back and welding in between the tacks. And then welding in each plug weld where a spot weld used to be. I used the locking C-clamp vice grip to push this sheet metal in to match the contour of the body. A ball peen hammer is also great for stretching sheet metal. Links to those will be in the description. And then worked my way around the inside of the repair panel. All right, here's how it turned out. I'm pretty happy with the results. I did burn through in a couple spots. I had to go back and go down a level on the heat to A and I was able to go back and weld in these really thin areas where I had burned through. You see, I actually have another hole right there. Anything smaller than that, I'm not going to worry about. I can fill it in with a seam sealer when I go back over it with that. I ended up switching to C for some of this because this was thicker metal here. And there's the plug welds down there. And here on the inside, same thing. I did use the ball peen hammer to kind of tap this in and get it to form and fit this curve here in the body. And now I've got this panel all cleaned up for my next layer, which is going to be a continuation of this raised edge right here. So I've got a couple of cardboard templates here. First, this one is going to go right here and continue that body line along the edge. And you can see it just kind of tapers out toward the end. And then once I get this welded into place, I'm going to go back with my bracket that I'm going to use to go over this body mount and help distribute some of that weight. The same bracket that we saw on the other truck, except mine is going to be a little bit more basic. And that's going to weld into here. Now you might notice I'm not using any weld through primer, and I'm sure you're going to get some comments about that. I really prefer fluid film at this point. I've got plenty of access inside all of the panels here. I've got this opening, I've got all these openings along the door edges. I've got a rubber plug right here. I can easily get inside and spray fluid film in here to keep this from ever rusting again. Fluid film will creep over time around every single spot weld and crevice that it touches. And because this is all an enclosed cavity, I will only have to apply it one time because it's not going to be getting washed off. Whereas normally I'd apply fluid film before every winter season on something that I'm going to drive through the winter. Right now I'm going to get these cardboard templates transferred onto some metal. All I have to bend the sheet metal is my old bench vise and some thicker pieces of scrap steel. I'm used to working with what I have on hand, so I was able to fabricate these pretty quickly. Then I went back and used the short wire wheel to take off any paint from the perimeter. However, when I went to grind the paint from the body mount bracket, I realized I got a little ahead of myself and couldn't reach all of the inside edges. And I had to bend it back flat on one side. So clean all the edges first, then bend any angles. So I've got this sort of held into place here. I'm figuring out how I want to weld this. What I think I'm going to do is, I've got this clamped in. I'm going to tack this in place to here, pull this whole section back out, weld this all the way around outside of the vehicle where I can get better access, and then put it back in place and weld this piece in. And I know I just said a little bit ago I wasn't going to need any weld through primer, but once I weld this on, I'm going to have almost a completely enclosed cavity. I could spray in here and hope that some ends up in here, but you can see there's only a small area where any fluid film is going to be able to get through. So I'm going to go ahead and spray this bare metal as well as this bare metal with the weld through primer just for a peace of mind. Got a very old can of 3M weld through coating. I'll put a link to a newer version of this in the description. Wow. And it's spraying out really heavy. I'm thinking this might have froze at some point. And a second light coat. I actually went ahead and ground some of the welds down because they weren't my best. A couple things I need to do now is I need to mark a hole for where I need to drill a hole through this for the body mount bolt. And to do that, I'm just going to go underneath and just get a pencil, run through there and just kind of run this around the inside here. Next, I need to get something sharp and scratch the paint off at each one of these plug welds. And this is so that I can start the arc for the MIG weld, because it won't do it if there's no bare metal showing for the ground. And I don't need to do that all the way around the perimeter, because once I get these welded, this will be the ground, and I can just weld around the seams. It doesn't matter if there is zinc coating there or not. There's my pencil mark. So I applied some more of the weld through zinc coating on the back, since I burned a lot of that off when I was welding this together. And then on the underside, while it's apart, is a good time to apply some self-etch primer. And I did that around the hole that I drilled, as well as the top side of the hole. Now let's get it in place and see how it looks. You can see the hole lines up well. I'll just drop this bolt in, kind of hold it still. I needed to weld the front side of the bracket from inside of the wheel well, so removing the wheel made more room to work. And now I'm modifying the floor pan to fit properly, starting with cutting a notch to clear the bracket. This corner needed work as well, so I need to cut out this circle to modify this floor pan to fit better. And this cutoff wheel is definitely not ideal for that. I clamped an old bearing race on here to use as a guide. Vever sent me this 50 amp plasma cutter to review, and I discovered how much easier a job can be with the right tools. I'll put a link in the description. For a couple $100, it's well worth the time saved. I'm fabricating a drop down where the new floor pan meets the body mount bracket, to make the design similar to the way it was from the factory. Next, I cleaned it all up with the grinder. And applied some self-etch primer before it has a chance to start rusting on the surface. I used a punch to put divots every few inches along this edge, and then drilled holes for plug welds. Alright, let this dry overnight because it sprayed out so thick and heavy. And now it is finally time to get the new floor welded in. Here I got the new and the old side by side. And you can see I did have to end up modifying this quite a bit. I had to bend this corner and sort of massage it with a hammer to bend it down flat, more like this one is. I did some massaging in this corner as well. And of course, I talked about cutting this out with a plasma cutter and actually re-welding it in a little bit lower, so it ends up being flush with my support right here, just like the factory one was. And this is only cut because I didn't want to go under the cab and drill out all the spot welds that held this to the cab. But here is the original tab on this one, and I went ahead and drilled some more holes in this so that I could spot weld this to the inside of my cab, just like it was from the factory. Once I double checked and triple checked that the floor pan was in the exact place I wanted it, I started with a few tack welds on one side. Then I used the hammer and vice grips to position the other sides as I was ready to weld them into place. All right, I'm all tacked in from here on back and across here. And this side here is pretty firm, although it's just pushed up against this edge. The next thing I need to do is go under the truck and do those plug welds to attach this side. I'm working my way back to the front, because I'm gonna have to adjust things up there anyway, since that's gonna be all custom. I want this to fit perfect right here. Well, I just vacuumed under the truck because I'm about to crawl under there, lifted up a little bit higher, and I heard some dripping. My gas tank has decided to start leaking again. All right, all the gas has had time to evaporate. Let's get back to work. So there they are. Not the best welder in the world, never said I was. And I also did some stitch welds along the bottom for a little extra reinforcement. So I have 1, 2.5 sides of my new floor panel sort of tacked in right now. And they came with a cut here to make this, I guess, so you can adjust it. And if you look at this level here, the bubble's way up on this side. So I'm actually gonna have to push this down when I weld this in to make this floor be a little bit more level. And you can see it over here too. It's way up high right now. So if I push it down about this far, that'll be perfect. And I'm guessing that's why they put this here. Once I tacked it in place, I was able to make a cardboard template for the rest of the space between the floor and the transmission tunnel. Rather than laying down one long continuous weld, you'll notice that I'm doing a lot of tacks spread over the seam because this helps to dissipate the heat. If sheet metal gets too hot, it tends to warp, and a long continuous bead can make that happen. This isn't important here inside the cab as, say, welding in a new quarter panel where it will be visible, but it's still good not to let the metal get too hot. I'm welding on both sides of the floor panel ridges first, which heats up the metal and makes it easier to flatten the top of the ridges with a hammer. Then, once the top of the ridges are flush with the transmission tunnel, I welded those. To get this panel flush with the floor pan across the bottom, I wedged a piece of wood behind it against the frame. I used a magnet to hold this corner piece in place until I had it all tacked in. And then I cut a tiny strip to fill the gap here where the floor pan split. So my next area of focus is going to be in this big open area here, and a couple things I need to do first. One, I didn't really think about cutting this off before I welded this in. So you can see I made a little line here where I'm going to have to cut this, and it's going to be a pretty tight area. But I should be able to get it in there pretty much with the cutoff wheel, and as I get closer to this tight corner where I can't reach, I'll make some relief cuts to get in there. And then I'm also going to trim this down a little bit just to make this flush so I can put one big piece right here instead of having to worry about that little tiny right angle to work around. Since this was an irregular surface with some compound curves, I held the template flush against the back with some duct tape to help the cardboard keep the shape of the cutout. I started welding the bottom first and worked my way up. This way, I could use the hammer to tap the curved upper section into place as I welded closer to the top. All right, and with this piece done, we're getting real close. I've got one small section up here left, and that's gonna be near a lot of wiring. I could try and stuff this welding blanket up there and tuck it around somehow, but what I'm gonna do instead is just take the whole blanket, ball it up, stuff it against this, and weld this last piece in from the outside. I've got a little better access, a little bit more room to work, and I don't have to worry about catching anything on fire or melting anything from the outside. All right, it's stuffed in there all nice and tight. I've got a magnet holding on this little piece from the outside. We'll get some tacks in it and then weld in the rest. All right, let's go see what kind of sparks the welding blanket absorbed here. Ooh, it's warm. Yeah, look at that. So, welding blanket, disposable, but a good investment. All right, I am officially done welding on the driver's side floor. It's all come together pretty nice. I'm happy with these welds. I'm definitely not a professional welder, but good enough for me. Now, my next step is to seal all this, and I have some seam sealer here. However, before I can use this, I need to prime it, and I have some self-etching primer here. However, before I can use this, I need to clean the welds with the wire brush one more time to make sure that there's no burnt areas around the welds. However, if you notice, especially on the inside here, some of these are a little bumpy. I've got a lot of high points here, so before I even use the wire wheel on those, I'm gonna hit it with a grinder first to make them a little bit more flush. Now, if this was any exterior bodywork, I'd make sure this was exactly flush with the surface, but because it's all gonna be hidden under the vinyl mat, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just kind of knocking down the high points here to make it a little more smooth for these products. Welds are all nice and cleaned up now. And here's what I did. I just kind of ground them down to make them a little bit less raised. I didn't bother grinding them down all the way smooth because it's going to be covered up. But this left a big mess. This is all the grindings and a lot of wires from the wire brush. Always wear eye protection when you're using these wire wheels because these things just fly off all the time. I'm going to vacuum this up with a shop vac, even get down here into cracks, and then I'll almost be ready to apply the primer. Before I can spray this self-etch primer on the surface, I'm going to go over it with some degreaser first and make sure that any kind of oils or wax or contaminants are removed, so that way I'll get a better bond with my self-etch primer. And you don't want to use paper towels because they will break down and you get lots of little pieces stuck on all the welds. So you want to use something like a cloth that's not going to shred if it rubs over any of the welds. And look at that. And same goes for the outside too. After giving any remaining degreaser plenty of time to air dry, I sprayed a coat of self-etching primer over all the welds and areas of bare metal. I let the self-etching primer dry according to the manufacturer's instructions, plus plenty of extra time because it was cold in the garage. Then it was time for the seam sealer. I'm using my finger to press the sealant down into any spaces next to the welds, and also applying enough pressure to push it through any tiny pinholes that I have in my welds. It may not look pretty, but a good seal is what's important here. I used the seam sealer on every weld, inside and out. I'll put a link for the seam sealer and all the other materials I've used for this project in the description. I ran out of rubber gloves, but you may want to use them to keep your hands clean. Here you can see where I had a few pinholes in my welds. Alright, I let the sealant dry overnight, and now the driver's floor is done. I'll put some paint on this later on after I repair the passenger side floor. And now this old truck is finally ready for the road. Thanks for watching. Well, unfortunately, I didn't get too far on just 32 ounces of gas. And now this old truck is finally ready for the road. Thanks for watching. All right, so this is getting there. It's getting better. You can see there's a little bit of, you can see there are some still, you can see there is, you might remember this from the frame repair. You might remember this from the frame repair. And my tool of choice for that is going to be the wire brush. No, I need to mark where I'm going to need to drill a hole for this bullet. Well, I just vacuumed under the trunk.